introduce myself first. I'm Katie Simpson-Smith, and I am serving this year as the Eudora Welty Chair for Southern Literature in the English department. But more importantly, I am serving as the teacher for the storytelling class, which has spent the semester thinking broadly and deeply about what stories are and where they come from and who listens to them. So we are so excited to welcome Alysia Steele in her capacity as master storyteller. I met Elysia a few years ago at a conference called TEDx Jackson, where we were both speakers, and she blew everyone else out of the water. The stories that she presented, but also the empathy that she had for these women that she listened to was so powerful. It was such a model of how we should listen to everyone that we run across in our lives, not just in the capacity of historian, but as friend and neighbor. So Alysia Steele is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and the author of the book Delta Jewels in Search of My Grandmother's Wisdom, which she'll be talking about today. She worked for over 12 years as a photojournalist at several newspapers, including the Columbus Dispatch and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And in 2006, she was part of the photo team for the Dallas Morning News that won the Pulitzer Prize in breaking news for their Hurricane Katrina coverage. She is now an assistant professor of journalism at the University of Mississippi's Meek School of Journalism and New Media. She founded the nonprofit Delta Jewels Support Foundation and is working to offer academic scholarships to students from Mississippi who record an oral history from an elder and write an essay about the experience, which my storytelling students will know all about. She is also currently working with her husband Bobby on their book, a collection of oral histories about cotton in Mississippi. I also should mention that this program is co-sponsored by the Mississippi Humanities Council, who gave Steele the 2016 Preserver of Mississippi Culture Award. Please join me in welcoming Alysia Steele.
Hi. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Does it sound? I think it's on. Okay. Katie, thank you so much. Katie is being very humble. She was the best speaker at TEDx that year, and my husband reminded me of that this morning when I was driving here. So I was like, my feelings were hurt. I'm like, I wasn't? And he was like, I've heard you. Big Katie, I remember Katie. So thank you for inviting me here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Delta Jewels. I moved to Mississippi almost 7 years ago. It was supposed to be 2 years, and now we're on year 7. And I love it. It's a push-pull factor with Mississippi. I'm from Pennsylvania. And when I first moved here in 2012, I was really struggling with identity and a sense of place. I missed my family. And I was raised by my grandparents. And my grandmother, particularly, I was close to her, but I also fought with her a lot. She was very strict. And as a journalist, the one regret that I have in my life is that I didn't record her voice or sit down and really talk to her. And that really hit me when I moved to Mississippi, because the images that I was seeing reminded me of her, and I wanted to talk to her, and she wasn't there. And so to find a little bit more about myself and to be comfortable and to really, it was about sense of place and sense of self. I decided to interview other people's grandmothers. That was the best that I could do. And I thought if I can understand her contemporaries, maybe I can understand her a little bit more. And in the process, I fell in love with these women, but I wanted to share some of their images. I'm going to talk about Mrs. Bynum. She was 101 when I interviewed her. Not every woman was an easy interview. Some of them were pretty difficult and challenging. But I still learned to love them. So that's Miss Bynum. This is Miss Ollie Mack. I love her name. She was like, what do you mean interview? What kind of questions? What do you want to talk to me about? I didn't find the women, the pastors. I reached out to pastors who were the gatekeepers of many of the Delta communities. And they recommended a woman to me. And sometimes I just knew their name and their phone number. Sometimes I knew their ages. But I always walked in not knowing anything other than their name or their ages or where they lived. Miss Burton, very difficult interview. She looks like she's tolerating me in this photo, and she was. When the publisher bought the book, they bought just their photographs and the transcripts. And my editor called me one day, and she said, "Why are there only 2 paragraphs about Miss Thornton?" I said, "Because she's me." And that was all she was going to share with me. And she said, "What do you mean?" So I started to tell her behind the scenes stories. And she was like, "You have to write that." So they gave me 3 weeks to write 54,000 words while I was teaching full time. And that's a lot of words. So anyway, I had to start writing behind the scenes, and I share that, and I weave their stories and my stories together in the book. Miss Floyd, I met her in church service, a woman that you're going to meet later. She called me one day, and the one thing that I interviewed 54 women, and the one thing that I loved was that I got 54 new grandmothers. But that also meant 54 women telling me what to do with my life. And so the woman that lives across the street from Miss Floyd said, "I want you to come to church." And this is in Sumner, which is about 2 hours from my house. They all live 2 to 4 hours away from me. And she said, "I want you to come to church." And I said, "Well, I'll check my schedule." She said, "I'll see you then," and she hung up. So I go to church, and Miss Floyd was running service, and she's about this tall, big voice, and I wanted to interview her, and she was not having it. So I'll talk about her in a little bit. But as I was driving in the Delta, I started taking students. I teach photojournalism, multimedia production, podcasting, beginning writing, and sometimes layout and design at Ole Miss. And I started taking students into the Delta outside of class so that they can learn photography and more hands-on from me. And I kept driving past this scene, and it's cotton. And it took me a good year before I had the nerve to walk into the field. It had a very scary history to me, and conflicted and painful. And I was on my way to interview a woman for the book, and it was a foggy day, and as a photographer I was like, "Oh, that's the perfect scenery, I need to stop and get this photo." So I stopped my truck, I opened the door, and I was like, "I'm just gonna put my boots on and just go. I'm gonna be 15 minutes, that's it." It turned into an hour. But what I found out is that mosquitoes in Mississippi love foggy days in the fields. And I had 3 doors open in my truck, and I was in the field for an hour. And if you can imagine, the mosquitoes are aggressive, they're big, and it was a traumatic day. I don't know how many bites. But I'm working on the book Cotton, and I met a farmer. So this book is about Mississippi Delta church mothers, elder Black women in the community who help the pastors run service, they run the programs, they help guide people and give advice, marital counseling, that kind of thing. And I learned what bless your heart means now because they told me that. But I was on my way to get this photograph, and I wanted to know who picked that cotton, who was working in that field. But I ended up meeting a cotton farmer for this next book that I'm doing. And I showed him this picture, and that was actually his land. So he's in book 2, and I photographed all over his property, and I didn't know that. Those are my grandparents, and I just wanted to have a side note. I was just talking to a young lady in the audience today. I spent so much time arguing with my grandmother about boys and makeup and curfew and grades. We just went at it all the time. And I couldn't wait to get away from her and experience life and get away from all the strict curfews and everything. And in doing that and running away, I didn't get to know her the way I should have. And I always tell young people, if you have these phones and you do selfies and you take pictures of your food and you take pictures of your pets and your girlfriends and your boyfriends, are you recording their voice? While you're doing these videos for Snapchat, are you taking your camera and recording the voices of your grandparents? Because there is nothing like regret when you get older and not knowing or remembering what their voice sounds like. And I want you to really think about that. If nothing else today, think about taking a picture of your grandparents and recording their voices. You have a simple button on your phone that will record audio, just do it. But don't be like me, regretting it 25, 28 years later. So the name of the book is Delta Jewels. This is cover woman Mrs. Campbell. She was 92, she passed away. 10 women from the book have passed away. The book's been out for 4 years. Several of them have stage 4 cancer. It's just a matter of time before I get more phone calls, and I always go speak at their funerals if they ask me. And I had a very close relationship with Mrs. Campbell, and I'll share her story in a little bit. The book is named Delta Jewels because there are 5 women in the book from Mount Bayou, Mississippi, which is the first all-black town in Mississippi that was formed by former slaves. President Roosevelt called it the Jewel of the Delta, and so I honored the women by calling them Delta Jewels. And just sharing some scenery, the images that I saw in the Delta, and I'm just going to pick fun of Mississippi for a minute, the directions that I get when I'm driving. And I'm going through that with Cotton now, and my husband's getting frustrated because he's writing this one for me. He's like, how did you do this? Because I'm constantly on the phone. They're like, well, go past that gas station, and then go past the next one, and then there's no sign on the street, but turn right here. Well, I wanted to go to a church service, and the pastor's like, when you see the sign for the town, go past that, okay? And you're gonna see a dirt road, okay? And you're gonna see a white church. That's not our church. Make a right and go to the next white church, but that's not our church either. Go past the bayou, there's a third church. There's no name on it, but that's our church. And so getting lost all the time, and you know, when I was in Mount Bayou, there's a son that gave me directions to interview his mother. And he said, you're gonna go over the railroad tracks, and then you're gonna turn right at the very next street. This is exactly what he said. You're gonna turn right, and then you're gonna go down another block and turn another right. Her house is the third house on the right. So I'm looking for the railroad tracks, and I can't find them. And I keep driving up and down this road that he told me to go, and then I start going further out of town, and I'm late. And he called me, he said, where are you? I said, I'm trying to find the railroad tracks, and I'm really frustrated now. And he said, oh, my bad, they've been gone for 50 years. But everybody knows that that's where the railroad tracks were. And I'm like, you have to remember, I'm a northerner. Don't call me a Yankee, I'm a northerner. So anyway, the directions were crazy. This is actually a church in Charleston, Mississippi, and I'm trying to find a time when they're open so that I can go and get access to, there's a water, it's separated from the road and a ditch and a gully kind of thing, and I'm trying to get access to climb over that gate because that church is still, I've been told that they still have service there, but I just found it a beautiful church, and I want to know who goes to that church. So I'm telling the students this was a personal project. No one assigned it to me. I didn't have grant money. I was still teaching full time, but I really missed my grandmother. And so in the middle of teaching, I started to do this project. And I didn't have a lot of confidence of what I was doing. Academia was new to me. That was my first time teaching. I had always been a newspaper photographer or an editor. So this was a whole new world. Mississippi was new, the culture was new, the landscape was new, my workload was new, all of it, and I just was really struggling. And my dean invited me to a breakfast, and I had been about halfway done with the book at this time. And there was a columnist, a religion columnist from the New York Times there. And I didn't have confidence in what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I needed to work on this project and find some kind of happiness. And my dean, so I'm listening to all the professors talk about their projects, and Sam, the writer, is listening. And my dean said, Al, did you talk to him about what you're doing? And I'm like, no. And he's like, why? I'm like, I'm not important. Like, it's just this project. And Sam said, what are you working on? I told him, and his eyes lit up. And he said, when you're done with that book, I'm going to come write about you. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Like, who am I? So he wrote to me. We exchanged business cards. And he wrote to me. He said, are you done with the book? I said, no, I have one more interview. The interview was Merle Evers. It took 9 months to get her. I said, I'm waiting on Merle Evers. He said, when you're done, I'm serious. I'm going to write about you. I said, okay. So I got her interview. And I wrote to him, I said, Sam, I'm done. He said, all right, I'm coming down. Let's go down into the Delta together. He said, what are you doing? I said, well, Before I knew this was going to be a book, I promised all of the women that I would give them a framed photograph of themselves, and I was going to self-publish a little book and give them copies and do a fundraiser. So Sam hung out with me for the day. He flew down, and we drove, and he met 3 or 4 of the women. He interviewed them, and he wrote about me. And from that came 3 book deals. And I say that to the students to find your passion and do what matters to you. My grandmother never wanted me to be a photographer. She said, how many black female photographers do you know? And I said, none. That's kind of the point. It's what I want to do. And she said, you're never going to make a career out of this. Find a new major. Find something else where you're going to make money. I'm not having a starving artist in the family. And I went to college and flunked out the first time. I enjoyed partying too much for studies. And I had to come home with my tail between my legs and find myself. And then I put myself through school. And I wish she were here today. I'm going to try really hard not to cry. I wish she were here to see what I've done, because the book was for her. I took 1 camera, 1 tripod, 1 mic stand, 1 wireless mic, 1 Zoom recorder, no lights. Why would I do that? Why do you think I would do that? Anybody? Yes?
To make it feel more authentic, as if we were really there.
Yes. So I'm a photographer. I'm used to going in and seeing images and observing people and watching body language. And it was hard for me to put the camera down first and talk to them. But I didn't want lights. I didn't want all of this major production, because that would have made it feel like I was objectifying them. And I wanted it to be a very intimate space. And so all of the pictures that you will see, there's no flash. It's very simple. I took 1 lens. I made it work. And I didn't want them, a lot of the women would say to me, what are you going to do with this? How are you going to use my words? Why do you want to interview me? What are you going to do with it? We don't need another white woman coming down here doing the book like the help. And I was like, well, I'm not white. And a lot of them would call me on the phone and be like, who are you and what are you? I got a lot of what are you? My accent, my voice, they didn't know if I was black, white. We had a lot of conversations about race and class, and there were a lot of hurdles. They didn't know me, and I had to have meetings with all of the pastors before I met the women. The first woman I wanted to photograph, she was 102, and the pastor said, I need you to come to church. I need you to come have dinner with my family. I need to put my eyes on you. And so it was a lot of doing a preliminary work before I could get access to the women. And then when I got access to the women, I had to explain who I was and what I wanted from them and what they were going to get in return, because it wasn't about taking. It was about also giving. There's no flash in any of the photographs. I would move the women by doors or windows. It took me 9 months to do the book. I went to 27 towns, interviewed 54 women, 240 hours of raw audio, drove 6,000 miles, 7,000 photographs. They were all 2 to 4 hours away from me. I was teaching full time. Ole Miss, I teach 2 classes in the fall and 3 in the spring. And I had no grants. And my husband was not working. He was a student getting his master's. So it was literally $25 gas here, $50 gas there, $100 here. I was a journalist in resident. I wasn't part of permanent faculty, so I got no grant money. And I didn't know how to apply for it because I'm a journalist. I didn't know. I just did what I wanted to do. I took a book by Chester Higgins, who's one of my mentors and a friend now. He did this book called Elder Grace, and he interviewed elder black people and got beautiful quotes. And so I took his book as inspiration. So it wasn't just, I had an idea, and I used the book, and I used his scholarship to kind of model what I wanted to do. And I just wanted you to see some of the notes that I had. I had a very minimalist release for the women. A lot of them had master's degrees or bachelor degrees. Some of them had 6th grade education. They had to pick cotton or chop cotton. So I kept the language very simple, and I would write notes on their release, and then I started to pay attention to their signatures, and it was fascinating to me. The only thing that I have left of my grandmother are a few photos, but I have a handwritten letter, and I treasure that. And just looking at her signature makes me weepy. So then I started thinking, well, what if I put their signatures in the book? So then I started having them sign below the top half so that I could scan their signatures. And then I went to them and I read. So I went to the women 3 times. I drove 6,000 miles to interview them. Then I drove 6,000 miles again to hand deliver their pictures, because your word is your bond. And then when I got the book deal, they made me drive back another 6,000 miles because my release wasn't to their liking for their lawyer. So I couldn't mail these releases to them. I couldn't email them to them. So I had to go and drive to all of them again, explain the release, let them know I wasn't trying to take something else from them or have them sign something else away to me. But I started writing notes, and I tell my students when I teach audio to write down times. So there's a time right here, 4 minutes and 49 seconds is when she starts talking about her marriage, so that I can go back to the audio and cut exactly what I want. So I made some mistakes along the way. Is anybody here collecting audio or okay? So the one thing that I learned is to not ask really important questions before your gear's on. That seems like an obvious thing, but I was so excited when I met Mrs. Campbell. She had been married 69 years, and her husband had passed away, I think 3 or 4 months before I met her. And I had my gear on the floor, and I am talking to her, and I'm trying to get my gear out. I'm trying to make conversation. I asked this really stupid question before I had everything set. I asked her what she loved about her husband. They had been married 69 years. And she said to her daughter, she had 2 of her daughters there, Alma and Emily, and she said, get your daddy's picture from the next room. And Alma said, Mama, she doesn't want to see that. And she said, I don't care if she wants to see it or not, give me the picture. She still hadn't made eye contact with me, and she still hadn't answered my question. Remember, my question was, what did you love about your husband? And her daughter gives her the picture, and all I can do as a journalist is watch this and know that I'm screwed, right? I just know that I've missed this moment. As a journalist, but as a human being, I'm honored that she's doing this in front of me. And she's holding this picture, it's in a frame, it's an 8 by 10. And she starts to trace her hands over his face. She still hadn't said a word to me, and tears start to fall. And I'm like, I'm missing this moment. As a journalist, we always think about moments, and I'm like, I'm missing this moment. I could not believe I asked her that question. And all I can do is watch. And finally she says, everything. And I was like, oh man, I totally missed this moment. So have your reporters on and ask them, like, are they a coffee drinker or a tea drinker? Ask them something stupid before you ask them something poignant, like, what did you love about your husband? So this is the woman that called me and asked me to go to church with her, Mrs. Bearden. I just surprised her at church 2 weeks ago, and I dragged my husband for that one too. That's the one that called me and said, I need you to come to church. So I go to church, but I'll back up. I meet her. Her name is Lila Bearden. And she had gotten married at Tuskegee Institute. Her husband was getting his 2nd master's degree. He was a World War II captain. And she met him in the library. He came to get a book. And she said, well, you know, all the veterans would come in and say they were single, but they weren't. And so I saw him, and I said, who's this? And he comes up to get a book. And she said, you're married? And he said, no. She said, bring your paperwork tomorrow, let me see. So they hands him asking her out on a date, and she doesn't think he's gonna come. And she goes off to hang out with her friends. And he goes to her job to pick her up. And she's there, and they tell her she left. He goes and finds her, and in front of her friends says, you said you were gonna go out with me. You need to be a woman of your word. We're going out now. And they went out. But she told me this story, but I wanted something deeper, because I know these women have a lot of life experiences. I know this. And so I've learned how to ask questions. And I teach my students when we're doing our podcast, I'll ask them a question. I'll say, how can you ask this 2 or 3 other ways? The way that you ask is going to, the way that you ask will determine how they answer you. And so I learned in the beginning, I would ask the women, what was your childhood like? It's an open-ended question. What was your childhood like? And they'll say, oh, you know, my parents canned. You know, we had a smokehouse for the hogs. We weren't hungry, so we weren't poor, which I found very interesting. But then when I would say to them, what childhood memory takes you back? Same kind of question, and I got a different answer. And I'm gonna let you hear some of the audio from that. So anyway, I was trying to get deeper with her husband. I know that they had something special. They were married 54 years when he died. And she said, my husband was an upstanding man, and he was a man of character. I said, well, talk to me about character. What do you mean by character? And she said, when he was 14 years old, he cut grass at plantations, and he saw that white women had wedding rings and black women didn't. And at 14 years old, he decided that he was going to save whatever money he could get, and whenever he got married, he was going to use that money to buy her wedding ring. 14 years later, he met her, and that's the ring he bought and gave her with the money that he saved. And when I talk to high school students, I'm like, how many 14-year-old boys do you know that are going to save their money for 14 years and buy a woman a wedding ring? But I just love that story. That said a lot about his character. That was something concrete that I could understand about his character and his determination. So then here's Miss Floyd. I go to church, Miss Bearden has me go. She sits in the front row. She has a little plaque with his name on it because he's passed away. And a little bit is running service. And I said, ooh, I want her in the book. So I go up after service. I said, Miss Floyd, I want you in my book. I don't want to be in your book. But I really want you in the book. I said, I don't want to be in the book. Well, here's my card. Did I ask for it? Okay. I said, no. So Miss Bearden's like, I'll talk to her. Don't worry about it. Call me in a couple weeks. So I called Miss Bearden 2 or 3 weeks later. I said, is Miss Floyd, do you think she's going to be in the book? Mm-hmm. Here's her number. Go ahead and call her. Mm-hmm. How do you think that went? I called her. I said, Miss Floyd. Mm-hmm. Some of the women would say, when I would call, and I would say, hello, may I speak to Miss So-and-so? How you doing, baby? What you doing? And I would say, nothing. Do you know what this is? No, but how you doing? I called Miss Floyd. Mm-hmm. I said, Miss Floyd, do you know who this is? Mm-hmm. How'd you get my number? Miss Bearden gave it to me. I totally threw it under the bus. I don't appreciate her giving you my number. I told you I didn't want to be in your book. She went on and on and on, and all I could do was hang up the phone and say, I'm sorry. So I called Miss Bearden. I said, this didn't go well. So I'm just telling you because I don't want y'all to have words at church. And she said, I ain't worried about her. 15, 20 minutes later, true story, she calls me. Why, Miss Steele, I'd love to be in your book. And I'm like, I don't know what Miss Bearden said. So I go to her house. She's standing in the doorway like this. She's this big. And I said, Miss Floyd, we're not going to have problems today, are we? And she was like, no, come on in. 3.5 hours later, she would not stop talking about her life. 3.5 hours later. And so the book isn't about an overview of their life. They're about poignant moments in their life. There's a difference between getting an overview and telling a story. Okay, there's a difference. And so she gave me all these stories, and I wanted 2 or 3 for each woman in the book. I said, Miss Floyd, I don't know what stories to put in the book. You gave me so many wonderful ones. She said, put them on. I said, the book's not about you. She said, well, it should be. She's sick. She has congestive heart failure. And I went to church service. Her pastor invited me to service last Sunday. And my husband and I went, and she wasn't there. And I was like, where's Miss Floyd? I'm not as diligent about calling them as I was. The book's been out 4 years. The first 2 years, I would send them all cards for Mother's Day. I would call them if I couldn't send cards. I kept in touch. I was more diligent, and I'm not now. And this reminded me that I need to be, because they're not just women in my book. They're extended family. So the pastor's like, she has heart failure. She's home. She just got out of the hospital. She was in South Haven. So I stopped over after church and she burst into tears. And I said, okay, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Your sons didn't tell me. So we went back to see her and took a little gift to her. But it just reminded me that I need to slow down in my life and acknowledge that older people in particular, they have challenges. I mean, we all have challenges, but I want her to know that I loved her. So I'm being more diligent in trying to keep in touch with her. This is what I proposed to the publisher. You can see the signatures. And that's not what it ended up being. They wanted my story woven into it, but I had X's next to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren because they had to count them, and that was a draft, because I wanted their legacies to be in there, not just their stories, but also their family. How many children, how many years married, how many great-grands. I wanted that record because the book is in the Library of Congress and it's labeled a history book. This is Miss Coleman. I thought she was white, and she passed away about a year after the book. She was 101 when I interviewed her, so she was 102 when she passed away. That's her smiling face. My husband was like, well, Miss Coleman, you can smile. She said, take the photo. And I was like, okay. But I'm looking at her, and I'm like, the book is about black women, because I know as a journalist, as older black women, that is a demographic that's often overlooked. And in the Delta, to my knowledge, no one has done a book like this. And so I wanted to give glory to the women, but the pastors would pick the women. My job was to find their stories, because everybody has a story. And I'm looking at her, and I'm like, how do I ask her if she's black or white? Like, I don't know. Doesn't she look white? So I'm like, so finally I said, Miss Coleman, may I ask your family makeup? And she said, you know, in my day, my dear, we weren't so inquisitive. And then she answered my question, but she is black, identified black, married a black man, had problems because people thought she was white, so he got harassed a lot. But she was like, I'm black. I was like, okay. This is Miss Howard. She's one of my favorites. She passed away the book came out in April. She passed away in October, I think. She was so bad. She was one of my favorite women. And I took my mom, a student, and my husband to meet her. I loved her so much. And she would cuss like a sailor. She was so bad, and she would sit in this chair, and she had a little TV next to her, and it would be so loud, and it would always have Judge Judy on it, no matter, I swear, like whenever I would go, there was always Judge Judy, and whenever I would go in their towns, I would call them to see if I could come by to say hi, and I knew that she loved the mangoes, so every time I knew I was going to be there, I'd take mangoes, and she loved Coca-Cola, the little cans, not the big cans, it had to be the little cans, and I would take those, and so I take my mom, my student, and my husband, and I'm like, you guys are gonna love her. Like, she's off the hook. And she's talking, and so I'm her, and she's talking to me and my mom and my student, but my husband's over here, and he can't hear her because Judge Judy is up so loud, and he reaches for the remote, and it was like she had like that peripheral, and she was like, young man. That TV, he was going to cut it off. She said, that TV has not been cut off since President Obama was elected the first time. And I swear, she touched the gun and tapped it. And he was like, oh, I'm going to put that right back where I got it. Because she was like, don't make me use this gun. She was so bad, I loved her. This is Miss Diller. She is 107. She's still alive. 107. She's in Yazoo City. I love her story. Her story was, she was a sharecropper. She lived on a plantation, and she wanted her children to go to school. And the boss man told her that her children could not go to school because if her children went to school, then all the other children were going to go to school, and he could not have that. And she said, well, my children will pick cotton, chop cotton after school and on weekends, but they're going to school. I want more for them. He said, if they go to school, I'm throwing you off the land. She said, well, go ahead and throw me off the land. He threw her off the land. They could only take what they could carry. All of her children have a college degree. But all of them have master's degrees, and one has a PhD. They all put their resources together to put each other through school, and then they put Mama through college. She got her bachelor's degree when she was 46 years old. I love that story. Education was so important to her that she was willing to take it off. And she got intimidated to vote. She was going to register to vote, and then at that time, for blacks, they would list their names in the newspapers for those who registered to vote or tried to register to vote. And so she was intimidated, so she didn't vote. But she was really excited, and I forgot when she voted for the first time, but she was really excited when she could. But we had community engagement programs because you can't take and not give back. And my publisher didn't think that Mississippians would buy the book or read. And so they didn't have me on a national tour, they had me on a national tour, but Mississippi was not included. So I reached out to Delta State and the Delta Center for Culture and Learning in the Mississippi Delta National Heritage Area. We partnered for 18 months and we did 15 community engagement programs. And we sold more books in Mississippi than anywhere. So I like to tell my publisher that. But Mrs. Diller is signing her page. All the women know their page. She had pens made that said Delta Julia Dillard. And it was wonderful to have them talk and to share their experience in front of people. So I'm going to play some audio. You're going to hear Mrs. Moore, because it's really important to hear their voices. Mrs. Moore, I don't know if I have her picture in here. She was married, I forgot how many years, 45? She has 15 children, 146 grandchildren, 23 great-grands, and 33 great-greats. Her house is like a village. And she loved her husband so much, she was in church with him one day when she was 23. She still gets mad about this if you ask her. There was a woman sitting behind her talking about how handsome her husband was. And she pulled the woman out of church. And I said, well, I'll go into this later, but she ended up punching the woman in the face. And because she said to the woman, that's my husband you're talking about. And the woman said, well, I didn't know that, but I meant what I said. And she said, well, I mean what I'm fitting to do. And she punched her between the eyes and knocked her out. And I said, what happened after that? And she said, my mama came out to church, her first name is Velma, and said, Velma, you know you're wrong. And she said, Mama, I ain't wrong. I didn't hit her in the church, I pulled her outside the church. So you're gonna hear her first. Mrs. Fox, she's gonna say that she wore breeches to church. And for the young people, breeches mean pants. Women weren't allowed to wear pants. And her grandfather was outside the church, saw her riding a horse to church in her brother's pants and beat her with a whip because she wore pants. Mrs. Bearden, the one whose husband saved the money up for the ring, is going to talk about riding a plane to Germany to meet him. And then Mrs. Somerville, who passed away, she's talking about being baptized in a bayou when she was 13. She wanted to be baptized. And when she passed away, I played that audio at her funeral. And I want you to think about that when you hear that she's talking about being baptized before she dies. And then I'm able to play that at her funeral. It's a very powerful moment.
Give me that old time religion.
That's Mrs. Floyd, who didn't want to
Give me
hear the
that
book.
old
That's
time
her singing.
religion. Give me that old time religion. It's good enough for me.
I loved his style, and he was wild about mine, so I thought he was just really beautiful. That's cute, that's cute. And I just really loved this man. He wasn't real tall, no. But no fat neither, because I ain't never liked a big old man. So, I knew I was cute. I know that was. Because everybody would tell me, you is one pretty young lady. So, and then when he told me, I knew I was. When he told me about it, oh, that made me feel really, really good.
On the first Sunday in May, I went across the churchyard with that horse and they were just running so pretty. You know, I was lacking the boys then, you know, I called myself cool. So some of the boys there, they had nice horses too, but mine was the prettiest. My granddaddy was sitting out there and he said, when I come up, what in the world you come across this church ground with them breeches on? I didn't say nothing. I said, Lord, I just went on down there and I changed my clothes and I had on this white organdy dress and it was, my mama made it, it was so pretty. And I got back up there and he was standing out there with his whip. I'm gonna learn you how to come across this church ground with breeches on. I said, Papa Hankin, I had to change my clothes when I had to ride the horse and I had to change my clothes. He hauled off and hit me with that me whooping and blood shot down my leg, all on my dress. Mama said, Mag, go and get on your horse and go on back home. When I got home, my daddy, he's sitting out on the cedar tree. Where in the world you going, Gal? What you coming back in for? And I went to cry. I don't know what he said to my granddaddy, but my granddaddy didn't come back to our house no more than 2 years.
We were only, African Americans were only, at that time, integration had just begun, just a little bit. So all the ladies on there were talking among themselves. They were not talking to me. And I didn't butt into anything to talk to them. And there was some captain wife was on here. Wonder where is she? They were putting, wonder if that's she over there. Wonder where is it? They go to them. Where's the captain's wife? Where's the captain's wife? And I was just letting them talk. So after a while, the sergeant called. He said, we're getting ready now to board. And we're gonna board the flight according to your husband's ranks. Seat number 1, Captain Rogers H. Bearden and his dependents. And I said, excuse me, please. I had to pass by them. I said, and after that, they looked at each other. They were so surprised because they didn't think it was be anybody except me, you see. So after that, they were so friendly. They hadn't been though, but they were so friendly. Miss Bearden this, and Miss Bearden that, Miss Bearden this. Well, that's the way it was until we got to Frankfurt, Germany.
I was 13, and they baptized me in Deer Creek, where the trees and bushes and snakes and fishes and everything was in there. But I was not afraid. See, Jesus was with me. That was a good day. When you meet Jesus, you never forget that. The sun was setting over in the west. You know, just before the sun go down, look like it gets bigger and it's orange colored, just above the treetop. And I was talking to the sun. I told the son to tell Jesus, I'm over here. I don't want to go home a sinner tonight. And while I was talking to the son, I heard a moan in the air above my head. And that moan was, Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. It just sounded like a choir.
I just love their voices. They're so powerful. Just please record your elders' voices, your parents, your grandparents, aunts, uncles. It is so important. I wish I could hear my grandmother's voice again.
So we did these speaking engagements in the towns, and this is everyone that helped.
And so I go to my first speaking engagement, and Miss Bynum, the one I call, she was 101, that's her. She used to call me white gal. And I said, Miss Bynum, no, I'm not white. I'm half white. And she was like, well, you look white to me. Well, anyway, when she passed away, she left this quilt for me. The Smithsonian wants it, and I won't give it to them. But her daughter surprised me and gave me a quilt, and it's filled with the cotton that she picked. And I treasure that quilt. I had no idea she left that for me, because we used to kind of banter back and forth. And then we started to see that communities, we didn't know, it became a problem because blacks and whites wouldn't even walk through the same door together in the Delta. We had to find neutral spaces, which in 2015 surprised me. But once we did, we started to see the pride in all of the women's voices. This is Mrs. Roberts. She was the first woman to register to vote in Coffeyville. And she was so, I'm looking for the word, she was intimidated to go register to vote. She was, someone was coming after her, and she passed the test to register to vote, and her husband had a 38 in his pocket to make sure that she was going to be safe. And then we started to see see blacks and whites of that generation start to sit down and talk to each other. So I'd like to think that there was a little bit of healing and a little bit of understanding. I know Mississippi has a painful past, but I don't know how you get past some of the things if you can't even talk about it, or at least acknowledge some things and start to have some honest conversations. So there's good people and there's bad people, both. And I think this, to me, was a beautiful moment. That's Mrs. Florida B. Smith in the book. And he's a pastor who's married. He just got married 3 years ago to a black woman. And so this is Hines Community College. I've been doing community talks for years. And students, this class, this is the professor, Pam. I can't remember, I think her name is Pamela. She used my book as a textbook for her English writing composition class. And the students had to interview their elders. And this young lady, didn't know who her father was. He had left her mother when her mother was pregnant. But she found her grandmother and interviewed her grandmother, her father's mother. And there was some healing going on in the family. And then this young lady interviewed her grandmother and didn't record her audio like the professor told her to do. And her grandmother died 3 days later, unexpectedly. And she fell apart. I gave the talk a couple of weeks prior, and the professor said they're writing essays from your, based off your book. And I said, when they do their presentations, let me know. I'll see if I can come out. I can give my students some homework and let me come and meet them. And so she did, and I was able to come. And this young lady was the first one to talk and fell apart, and we were all in tears. Her grandmother's funeral was going to be 2 or 3 days after I came to visit. She was like, I can't believe I didn't record her voice. So then one of the Smithsonians invited us to come talk, and that's the cover woman, and then Rena Evers came. And Mrs. Campbell loves President Obama so much that she took 12 pictures of her grandchildren off the wall and hung up 12 pictures of him. And as I told you, she passed away, and the pictures are still up. And she loved him so much. It took a year, but we got her into the White House. And it was around the same time that the 105-year-old woman danced with President Obama. I tried so hard to get her to meet him, but we couldn't make it happen. But we did get her into the White House. And when she passed away, I had a big picture made of her that was in my home, because I gave her 8 by 10. But when she passed away, I gave the picture that I made for myself in my house to her family, and we went into the house. The 12 pictures of Obama are still up, but a picture of my husband and I made it to her wall, so I felt really honored by that. But this is the quote that she gave, and I like students, young people, to always think about the elders. And I know you can read it, but I'm going to read it. Visiting the White House with my daughters was more than my mind could conceive. I held my ID in my hand for so long. How many more stops do I get to make? Where do we get to go next, and who do we get to meet? And to me, that pretty much summarizes what this project meant to me and what it meant to them. So, Katie has already gone through all that. I wanted to play a little bit.
Neighbors are kind.
I wanted to play a little bit of the audio for Cotton, which is the new book. And I'm going to try to move it forward a little bit if I can. This is J.B. Dutton, the farmer whose cotton farm I had in my book. This is him. And I love his voice.
That's what I grew up with, and all the ambitions I had in my life, directly or indirectly, came through cotton and cotton production. So, I guess it's a happy feel when you see it, because there's so many good memories. Watching the fields and watching the crops, especially as they develop. It's almost like watching a baby grow. Our workers came to work every morning. They would drink coffee, and 10 or 12 men in there. That's how many people, different people, were farming the land that where I am right now. And so there was just a great camaraderie and friendships and such that were developed there. Just a close-knit group of men. And because of the economies of scale, those men who were my father's generation, they retired, eventually died off, and there's no camaraderie like that for me like it was then. And that's something that I really miss, because it was kind of the culture of cotton, the culture of growing cotton, of farming, of rural life, need somebody to laugh with or cry with. Technology and all has actually distanced us from personal relationships, ironically. The farm operations became larger in scale and eliminated people. You know, we've lost a lot with that.
So I'll end it there. There's my contact information. I just wanted to read, I transcribed all of their audio. As I said, I was broke, so I couldn't afford transcription service. So I put headphones on and transcribed word for word, which is a very tedious and painful experience. I see some people, it is not fun. Imagine going through 240 hours to transcribe for a book. But I wanted to read Mrs. Moore that pulled the woman out of church that has the 15 children. She was the first one you heard when she was laughing. When I read their words back to them to make sure I was accurate, the tears. And they couldn't believe that they said these things. I'm like, I didn't change anything. But I want you to hear what she said. She was married 45 years to her husband. And I asked her, what was it like being married for 45 years? How do you keep the marriage together? And she said, you talk about love. Mine was deep down. I reckon because I loved his style. I loved his style. He was wild about mine. And when we get together and get to talking, I thought he was beautiful. I just really loved that man. He wasn't real tall. You heard some of this. And he wasn't no fat neither, because I never liked the big old man. He had a stylish walk, the cutest walk, and I loved that walk. And with that walk, he was more better looking. He dressed real neat, and he talked real kind. And I wouldn't say how my style was to him, but I knew I was cute, because everybody would tell me he was one pretty young lady. And when he told me, I knew I was, and that made me feel really, really good. And then I asked her about how long they had been married and did they ever think about divorce. And she said, if you're going to marry somebody, you're supposed to marry them till death do you part. You hang in there. There's going to be some dark days, some light days, but you hang in there. I always said, Lord, I want one husband. I want all my children to be by that one man, and God fixed it so. We got 15 heads. He was the first man I married, never been married no more, and never will. No, I will not. And I got 15 children by that one man. And I thank God I did just like he said. We was not divorced. I'm still Mrs. Moore. I'll be Mrs. Moore till I'm dead and gone. That's it. Thank you for your time. I left a couple minutes. Yes, ma'am. I see you.
Tremendous. When I saw the kids from the gift, I was so excited.
Oh, thank you.
When it came out, I got it, and it just, I love the work that you're doing. I wanted to ask a practical kind of, you were talking about the process of putting these together, collecting all those hours, the work, and no grants and no support, or rather, only your own support, right? Which you could. And as a person who has like pieces of 3 different projects of this sort that I've been collecting over the years, in the summer when I get to go home to South Louisiana, what advice do you have for those of us who are interested in doing this work for kind of maintaining the momentum, organizing, and did you find a writing group to work with? I mean, like, how did you make it happen?
I did all of it by myself in between classes. So literally, if I taught Tuesday, Thursday, I was on the road Wednesday, Friday, writing Saturday, Sunday. Now for Cotton, I'm teaching 3 classes. I'm in a doctoral program and writing this book. So it's crazy. And I'm very strict with I have a very strict schedule that I try not to go outside of. The one thing that I could say is as soon as you get home from that interview, catalog it. Don't wait a couple of weeks. I also wrote notes of what I saw, what I listened to, what I smelled. I wrote down what songs I was listening to when the women called me or when I was driving, but I cataloged it that night. And I was so I would have the date and the other thing, I saved everything on 3 hard drives, and 2 of those hard drives crashed and I lost. And then the third one, it's corrupted. But when I say I lost everything on them because they just won't work. And then the third one is corrupt, and I have at least 20 jump flash drives of my content, but I lost all my raw huge gallery-sized photos that I could do for an exhibit like at the Smithsonian. I can't do that because I lost all the raw images. I only have the JPEGs, which are smaller images. So I save them in different places. I have a Google Drive. I paid extra money for Google Drive so that I could put all my raw audio and video there. But I would create a folder with their name. Now I pay for transcriptions, and I have the transcriptions done, and then I put that in a folder. I put audio in a folder, I put pictures in a folder, and I put my video, because I'm doing video for Cotton. All of that are in separate folders. I wrote down times. So some of the interviews, like Mrs. Floyd, was 3.5 hours, and I'm not going to stop them from talking unless I have another interview to go to. But when I would listen to the audio, I always wear headphones. You must wear headphones when you do audio so that you can hear the sound and make adjustments if you need to move to another room. Doing audio and video without headphones is not a good thing. So I would, when I would listen to them, before I would interview them, I would say, you're gonna see me with headphones on. I'm listening to you. You're gonna see me write down notes. It's because you said something that I wanna go back to. And I would write down the times. So I would keep the recorder near me and I would look at the times. And if they said something really poignant, I put an asterisk in the time that it started so I knew where to go back. Because listening to 3.5 hours and trying to find that audio is insane. So I would write down the times. So I don't know if that's helping you or not, but I wrote everything by myself until I was done. And then I had someone that was married into the Faulkner family help me. But I wrote down notes as I was going. I wrote down my feelings as I was going, because you'll forget it if you don't do it that night. And I set time aside. So I knew 2 hours one night after I came back was cataloging, writing down my notes, highlighting what I thought I wanted from those stories. And now I have interns because we have a nonprofit. And so I hire some of the students to come with me, but I also have an internship program with OMS, and so the journalism students get to come with me and help me, and they get that experience and I get help. And so I would have them help me with the process. I don't know if that answers your question, but
it was super helpful. In fact, sorry, if you're recording all this, I'm going to definitely want to insert this for future classes.
Okay. All right, good. Yes, you must catalog. Yeah. And save it in different places. Don't be like me. I was devastated when I lost the 2 hard drives. And the third
my
one.
first copy of my dissertation, I had to save it.
Isn't it? It hurts. It hurts. Yeah, there was no consoling me. So, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So, if I wanted to do like a project like this, like I'm from the Delta, so I have a lot of people around me who have similar experiences, and like one of the women said, I was baptized in a lake. So like stuff like that, I like to catalog and stuff like that. So like, would it be cool to like start at my age?
Yes.
Is it too early to start? Is that the question?
So I don't know if you can hear the question in the back, but she's from the Delta and she has similar experiences, and she's asking if she's too young to start it now. Is that correct?
Yeah.
No, start it. Start and interview your elders. We've already talked about you going back and talking to your family, but record that now. You're young, you're vibrant. You know, you have so many plans that you want to do, but don't forget your family. Because no matter what, they're always going to be your family. And when they're gone, there's nothing that's going to fix that heartbreak if you don't have that audio or you don't have those pictures. So start it now. And a lot of young people ask me, how do I get my grandparents to talk to me, because they don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, well, what will they talk about? There's a young woman that UNC had me there a couple weeks ago. And this young lady, her grandmother has breast cancer, and it's terminal. And she's like, I love my grandmother, and I never even thought to do this, and I'm a journalism student. What do I do? And I said, well, she's like, she's not really going to want to talk about her past. I said, well, what will she talk about? Start there. Just get something recorded. And I said, what do you love that she used to make for you? Because people will always talk about food. And it's never just about food. There's always something else. And she said, oh, I love this vegetable soup she would make me. Then ask her where she got that recipe from. Where did she learn how to cook that? Who taught her how to cook? What was her favorite thing to eat that her grandmother would make her? Find a way to get them to talk about whatever they will and move forward with that. So that's another thing that I always tell the students to do. So do that with your grandmother. Find out, is your grandmother still around?
Yeah, she's still around.
She's still around? Is she talkative?
like, maybe it's just me, like, I don't know, like, what to ask them, and, like, what they're comfortable talking about, so I just,
Well, what do you want to know about her?
I don't know, like, what it was like growing up, cause, like, she told me that she, grew up in, like, a shotgun house, and on, like, a sharecropping, and, like, they picked cotton before they went to school. And after.
Okay, so now you just told me you're from Chula?
Yeah.
So now I want your grandma in my book. But I want you there. I want you there with me so that you can watch. And then that audio, I'll give it to you. Is that a deal?
Yeah.
So let's talk. Because then you can sit down. I had a young lady that came from high school. We had a program for high school students at OMAS. And I was doing this presentation when I was still working on it. And I heard this voice. The room was packed. And I was like, all these 15, 16-year-olds want to hear me talk about this? Like, it was surprising. And I heard this voice, I want my grandma in your book. I said, okay. I couldn't see her. I said, let's talk after the program. She called her grandmother on the spot. Her grandmother agreed, even though she didn't want to. And I said, the only way I'm going to do it is if you're there with me and you can ask questions and you can help, and then you get the audio. So that's my challenge and my invitation for you. Okay? Yes. Anything else? Yes.
I saw from the photos and that one clip of video you saw that it's all in black and white. So why did you choose not to have color?
Wow, and some of the women wore absolutely gorgeous clothes. This one older woman from Lambert, Mississippi, wore an all pink silk outfit, head to toe. It was gorgeous. And I made it black and white because I wanted that timeless feeling that I think color can distract away from the stories and the faces, and I really wanted black and white because I wanted that timeless feeling. And so all the pictures were shot in color, but my camera will also allow me to shoot in black and white. So I had two images. I had two images. The raw was in color, the JPEG was in black and white. So, yeah. But I did that because I wanted that feeling. And it was hard because some of them wore absolutely beautiful clothes. And they all wanted their hats. And they wanted to, I see your hand. You have your hand up, sir? Okay. They all wanted to look, and I would take, as I was going, I would read their stories and show them their pictures, and they had input on their photos, and which is very dangerous to do because as journalists, we don't like to show our work. Somebody wants to change what they said, somebody wants to get a new photograph, and that happened a couple times. But it was what it was that day. There was no going back and getting interviews. It's one shot deal. You're a journalist, you get that story, and that's what you work with. And I forgot where I was going with that, but yeah, I wanted black and white. Yes, sir.
Is there any women that you tried to interview that just didn't comply with you?
Yes, there's one woman. I interviewed 55 women, and there's one woman who just refused to answer questions. It was yes, no, I could not get her to talk, and after 40 minutes, I was like, okay, she's not willing to do this, and I'm not gonna make her uncomfortable. She regrets it now. And there's one woman, I interviewed the widow of the funeral home director who prepared Emmett Till's body, Lily Jackson. It took me a while to get her to agree, and the first thing she said was, I'm not important. But her best friend was in the room, and I said, do you wanna be in the story, in the book? She was like, no. When the book came out, she was like, I really should have said yes. She was like, are you gonna do another one? I'm like, no. Like, there's one Delta Jules. I might try to see if she has a cotton story, but that one woman would not budge. So there's one. But in my philosophy is everyone has a story. And if there's a way that you can find an opening and they're willing to like open themselves to you, then it's my job as a journalist to try to find it. So, but she was the one who just wasn't having it. Good question. Any others? Okay. Thank you.